Marymount University. I'm Fernando Guerra, professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. Today we have with us Miguel Santana, the Chief Administrative Officer of the City of LA, the CAO. Before being Chief Administrative Officer here in the city, he was Deputy Chief Administrative Officer in the County of Los Angeles, working with Bill Fujioka. And before that, he worked many years with Gloria Molina, Supervisor Gloria Molina. He also worked at Maldef and even at Pomona College. He is a graduate of Whittier College and also has a master's from Harvard University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
You work both with Councilmember Garcetti and Controller Wendy Gruhl. What's the difference between the two of them in terms of their management styles and how they work with you?
So with Councilman Garcetti, when he was president of the council, I also met weekly with. We spent a lot of work together discussing, obviously, the budget. When I first got to the city, the first year was really the most difficult that the city ever encountered. And so I met with him on a regular basis, developing various budgetary solutions. I worked very closely with the staff. We worked together on developing sort of solutions around labor concessions, and where he played a role in as council president and as well as a member of the committee that gives me direction with bargaining instructions. With Controller Gruhl, in some ways our two offices share a common understanding of the city's finances. We rely on her information to determine what our reserves are, they prepare our various reports that we issue to bond rating agencies. I would meet with the controller on a regular basis as well, because we shared a number of similar responsibilities, but from different perspectives. I looked at it from the policy budgetary, she looked at it from the accounting perspective. She sought my advice on potential areas to audit based on what we were seeing, patterns that we were noticing, and we worked very closely together. So either one of them will make an outstanding mayor.
You are the top non-elected official in the city of LA. And the mayor hires you, but the city council has to approve your hire. Who fires you?
Ultimately,
not that I've heard anything, but it's just, what's that process like?
Well, it's a complicated process because ultimately the mayor can choose to have the CAO leave that office. 2/3 of the council can overturn that decision.
So the mayor can fire you, and if the council does nothing, you're fired.
That's right.
And if the council tries to overturn that, there are 15 council members, 10 of them have to vote.
That's right.
To go against the city council. Now, unlike the national government, when President Obama won and he got into office, he replaced everybody in terms of the cabinet, right? Except for one. The Secretary of Defense, Gates, actually stayed from George Bush to Obama. But it's known that in that environment, the chief executive, meaning the president, gets to choose who his cabinet is. Here, when the new mayor takes over on July 1st, Eric Garcetti or Wendy Gruhl, they will have their cabinet, meaning you and the other general managers there, and they just completely roll over. There's not a whole new appointment of them?
Well, I think each mayor sort of has their own approach to how they deal with that issue, that transition. I think for the most part, most general managers stay through a transition, and then over a period of time, through attrition, changes are made. That's certainly been the case for CAOs over the last few years.
Councilman Garcetti has stated that in many debates and in public that he would ask all general managers, and I am assuming that includes you, that they would have to reapply for their position. What does that mean?
That means that the next mayor, whether it's Councilman Garcetti or Controller Gruhl, and I will have a conversation about that.
Okay. So there's no formal process in terms of reapplying or something of that nature?
Not that I know of.
Okay. One of the unions interviewed people who wanted to be mayor, several of the candidates, and they said that they would only support that person if they would fire you. Okay, how did that make you feel?
I wasn't surprised. I mean,
but why does that union want you fired?
Well, you know, the role of the CAO is to provide an independent, honest, and straightforward assessment of the city's finances. And this has been by far the most challenging 4 years that the city has confronted since the Great Depression. 80 to 90% of our cost goes to our labor, to our own people.
But that's not unusual for most organizations.
It is not
like
unusual.
Here at Loyola Marymount University, the vast majority of what we spend on operating budget every year goes to pay the salaries of the faculty and the staff.
That's correct. So in a context where you're facing deficit after deficit and with really no light beyond the next several years, as a way of addressing that issue, you have to go to labor and ask for concessions. By charter, the CAO is the lead negotiator. And
when you say charter, that's like the city's constitution.
That's correct. The city's constitution establishes the CAO as the lead negotiator. And so I receive my bargaining instructions from the mayor and the council leadership and then get asked to negotiate it. Mm-hmm. And in the environment that we've been in, the context has always been about asking because of the deficits we've confronted. Prior to my arrival, the CAO and the mayor and the council approved a series of raises, 25% raise over 5 years.
What year was that, 2009, 2008?
2007.
2007.
Yeah, they approved a series of raises that I recommended being renegotiated due to the fiscal crisis.
But in 2007, we were not in the fiscal crisis yet. It started to decline in the last quarter of 2007.
That's right.
So when they passed this, the economy was still humming along.
It was doing unprecedentedly well. It was, home prices were skyrocketing, property taxes were on the rise, unemployment was was record lows, and so no one foresaw the kind of crisis that we experienced. And so several months later, the crisis occurs. They try to, patch things through for the first year, and then it became very clear that the raises that had been negotiated were just simply out of reach as we confronted the recession. And so when I arrived 4 years ago, I started off with a proposal that we find a way to eliminate those raises. And so no one likes to take a pay cut. It's
right.
not, and we also had to impose furloughs for the first time in the city's history.
Now, what's a furlough?
A furlough is basically you get asked to work less hours than you're normally assigned.
And you get paid for less.
And you get paid for less. So this federal government is currently going through that due to sequestration. We had to lay off employees for the first time in the city's history. We laid off a significant number of employees, about 500. And so there was a lot of very difficult actions that the mayor and the city council had to take, and it was my office that was recommending those. And so, not surprisingly, I'm not necessarily the most favorite person within certain sectors of labor. I wouldn't say all. And so when that story came out, I wasn't necessarily surprised.
So like when you're walking the halls of City Hall, employees try to avoid making eye contact with you because they see you as like the grim reaper walking through, and it might be their job if they look too closely at you?
I haven't really experienced that. I think most of our employees understand that we are in unprecedented times, and most employees actually voted to renegotiate the contracts, not just once but twice. Most employees experience furloughs. Most employees are now contributing to retiree health care when they used to get it for free.
Right.
And so, our workforce has experienced a tremendous amount of turmoil over the last 4 years. Imagine what it's like not being able to tell your family what your paycheck's going to be, because furloughs are going to be imposed, or fears of layoffs. You're having to work harder because there's less people. The uncertainty around just being in that kind of environment. So our employees have actually weathered the storm, and I think have taken on with a tremendous amount of dignity and respect for the tough choices that needed to be made. I think we're all wanting some stability, and so, fortunately, the economy is doing better.
But we're not at the stability that you would like
No,
yet.
unfortunately, we're still facing projected deficits out for the next 4 years. But if we continue the path that this mayor and this council have established, not dramatically increase the size of the workforce, allow the pension reforms that have been approved to take hold, not unwind the various concessions that we've been able to obtain, and not give future raises for the next 4 years, we could actually experience a surplus by the 2017.
But, I mean, there's always been this grand understanding that if you go and work for the public sector, you're going to make a little bit less than you would in an equally type of job in the private sector. But you would have stability, you would have a great pension, you would know what's going to be happening in terms of your future. So there's less reward up front, but less risk in terms of your later on in years. That was always why you went to go work for the public sector. And you know, I have had many former students who, when faced with a decision about either going to work for the city or the county or a water district or whatever, compared to the private sector, we always had this discussion. Yeah, you're going to make a little bit less right now, but if you're planning to make a long-term career out of this, in the long run, you might be better off. And that's always been the understanding. And it seems that that bargain is kind of going away. People say they want government to pay the same as the private sector. But in fact, the private sector pays a little bit more in some of these categories.
Or a little bit less. I mean, it depends on which category you're talking about. You know, what's happened in Los Angeles is not unique.
But do you agree that there was this grand understanding at one point?
No, I think you're right. I think a lot of people went into public service first because they believe in public service and they believe in doing work that benefits the broader community. I know certainly that's why I've been in public service for my entire career. And then there was also a sense that it provided a level of stability. You know, my oldest daughter graduated from Columbia a few years ago, and she was out looking for different levels of employment, and for her, stability was important. And so she recently got a job at the county and is working there now and hopes to have a successful career there. And she also is doing work that she thinks is very important and meaningful. And so, you know, every person has their own sort of preferences, but what's happening in government is not new to Los Angeles. When I talk to my counterparts in Chicago, in San Francisco and San Diego, just throughout the country, whether it's at the national level or even at the local level, we're all experiencing some level of this transformation. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is that there are so many demands put on what we deliver, the services that we provide, and the revenues that we're expected to utilize to deliver those services are simply not enough. And in an environment where the private sector and most Americans are feeling like we already pay too much, then ultimately you're going to start seeing this kind of tension that's going to be occurring. So the solution is ultimately for government to decide what it is that its core services. What is it as a city that only we can provide?
Right.
Public safety, maintaining our roads, maintaining our parks, our fire services, those things that are central to our core mission. And then for those things that are important but not central to that mission, we need to find ways to partner with the private sector, with the nonprofit community, and figure out.
What's an example of that?
So, you know, what we've talked about often are the convention centers.
Yeah, but we've been talking about that for years. How come?
Well,
I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm totally in agreement with you on that. But why can't we do that?
Well, we can, and we're on our way to doing it. So the mayor of the council actually approved having us have a private operator for the convention center. And we engaged in a process to solicit proposals. One of the proposals didn't submit all the information they needed, and so we're starting all over again, but we're going to do it in a compact way. I believe that within the next several weeks, a decision will be made to partner with a for-profit entity to run the convention center and at a more effective way, at a more cost-effective way as well. We're looking at a number of other opportunities. We had an animal shelter in the San Fernando Valley that was basically built using tax bond proceeds. Because of the recession, we never were able to open it.
Because of the people. Now, you had built the building, but to house it with people to service that, it would have cost you so much that you couldn't afford to do it.
Right. So we basically used it to warehouse animals that were used for evidence for a variety of different reasons. And so what we did is we partnered with a nonprofit humane society, the Best Friends, and they're currently operating that facility as a world-class adoption center, increasing the number of animals that are being adopted, and thus reducing the number of animals that are euthanized in the system as a whole. So it's a very effective public-private partnership. So those kinds of models can work where we're still engaged in supporting activities, but not necessarily doing it exclusively ourselves. At the same time, on those things where we're clearly responsible for, we need to find ways to be more efficient and more effective and use the latest approaches and technologies and make a real investment in ensuring that we provide world-class services.
So let's just go back to the employees. From what I understand, employees obviously cost us in terms of their salary. Then they cost us in terms of their benefits, retirement benefits, and then their health benefits.
Right.
Okay? And when we start, and one of the big discussions is that the city guarantees what their benefits will be after they retire based on a formula. Whereas here at Loyola Marymount University, the university puts in a certain amount for my retirement, but they don't guarantee, and if my investments go south because of Wall Street or whatever, I get whatever, when I retire, whatever the value of that investment is.
Right.
Okay, so that's a big difference. And there's an increasing sentiment by non-public employees that be done away with. What are the chances of that happening?
Well, I think the issue of pension reform is really about how do you ensure that the promise that government has made to those who are retired and those who currently work for government is actually met.
Well, it's not only a promise, it's by law, it's a contract, right? So it can't be.
It's an actual obligation and responsibility we have. It's a vested right.
Right.
Your pension is your vested right. So the discussion around pension reform is as much about ensuring that we could afford it, not just so that we could provide other services beyond just paying for pensions, but also so that we could actually deliver on that commitment. Mm-hmm. And so current employees should be the most interested in making sure that our pension system is sustainable because they have the most at stake, right? And so we've approached pension reform by looking at if we are committed to that promise, then what can we do to have a new pension system for those who aren't working for the city today in a manner that we can afford? And so the law is clear. The city can, in fact, adopt a new pension tier that doesn't impact new employees.
But that's become a campaign issue. You recognize there's one candidate who says, no, that you needed to negotiate that with the existing unions. And there's another candidate who was part of that negotiation who said, no, this is, and saying what you're saying right now, that in fact this is legal. Who do you negotiate with? We don't even know who the future employees are. How do you do that?
And so the issue is, the real issue is less about whether it's the how we did it, is the fact that it has to be done in order so we could deliver on the promise for those who are currently working for us. And so it is those employees that are the most interested in making sure that we have a sustainable system. Right. If we continue on the path that we're headed, and there are cities around the state that are testing this idea, Stockton and San Bernardino in particular, then there could be a time that we're actually piercing through that commitment.
So just Stockton and San Bernardino, they declared bankruptcy, and then they are saying, when you declare bankruptcy, you can get rid of contracts, including the contract we had with retirees or potential retirees.
That's right.
And then therefore, their retirement is not guaranteed.
That is correct. And so what we're saying is that we don't want to end up there. We don't want to be in a place that the only way we could continue on is by piercing through that commitment. And so in order to make a system sustainable, what we need to do is make a different kind of commitment to those employees who don't work here. Why is that feasible and fair? It's fair because our pension system was designed when people didn't live as long as they live today. We moved it from age 55 to age 65 because guess what? People are now living to 75, 85, 95. There was a story in the front page of National Geographic that showed a baby and basically said this kid's going to live to be 120. And that's actually not that far-fetched.
Right.
And so if you retire at 55 and you live to be 85 to 95, that's a long time for a pension system to support. So a new generation is going to live longer. That new generation is also going to have different abilities to contribute to the pension system that the current generation didn't. So it is our responsibility to the people who are currently who that promise has been made, to ensure that the overall system is sustainable. Right. And so having a new pension system is part of that plan.
This is not like very interesting or sexy public policy, kids here in my class, they want to talk about...
Yeah, you're probably putting them to sleep.
They want to talk about environmental justice. They want to talk about bringing a football team. They want to talk about police and things of that nature. But before you solve this problem, you can't deal with any of those things. It really determines what size of a police department you're going to have and everything else that you're going to do. So you released the budget this week.
The mayor did.
The mayor did.
It's his budget.
Okay, but you guys helped put it together?
Yes, we work very closely with the mayor.
So start with the budget process. What's that process like? Now, one thing I have to say is people have missions and goals. Here at the university, we have all kinds of missions and goals. We actually post the missions and goals in every single classroom. And if you when you walk into a classroom, you will see what the code is for students and what we promise in terms of the mission and goals. But if you really want to know what any institution is really like and what their priorities are, don't look at their mission and goals, look at their budget. That will tell you what they prioritize, what is the most important, because that's what they're spending money on. And you can say the same thing for a household, and you get a family of 4 and you say, what are your priorities? Where do they spend their money? Do they spend their money on education or on a car or on a home? That's their priorities. Okay, so when the city releases a budget, you're basically saying, this is our priorities. This is what we believe in.
That's right.
And this is what we are going to go and invest in going forward. When does the process for the budget start?
It actually starts in November. The budget by charter has to be released by April 20th. This year it was released on the 22nd because April 20th was on a Saturday. And it starts way in November, where we start making an assessment of how we're going to be doing and whether we're going to be seeing a problem and what that's likely to look like. And we get direction from the mayor in terms of how he wants to approach it. And for the most part, 90% of the budget stays the same year after year. The budget is really a discussion of the changes more than anything else. And speaking to your point on priority, so if you look at the budget that's been released for the last few years, and certainly the one that was released yesterday, the number one priority that the city's committed to is public safety. Public safety is the foundation of any economic development program. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to visit Los Angeles, and we have the record number of visitors coming to our city. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to invest in the city, they're not going to live in the city, they're not going to raise their families here. And so public safety covers about over 70% of the discretionary funding that the mayor and the council has. It's a very significant amount of revenue that goes to public safety because it plays such an important role.
And public safety is not just police, right?
It's police and fire and a few other departments, but police by far is the largest department. And so when we begin that process, first reflecting what the mayor's priorities are. And this mayor has really identified public safety as sort of one of the major issues he's tackled on, and he's been able to do so successfully. Beyond that, then we look at everything else we're responsible for doing, maintaining our roads.
But when you say, I mean, we can't dismiss when you say beyond that, public safety eats up.
Over 70% of our discretionary funding.
So 70% of the general fund, that's not determined by fees or regulations or whatever, 70%, okay? So you can't just lightly say, oh, let's take care of that, because it has an impact everything else you can do.
That's correct.
So the mayor has said he wants 10,000 cops.
Right.
Okay, and he's reached that goal, okay? The city has also been the safest it's been in a long time.
The 1950s.
Since the 1950s. And it's, you know, obviously we see crime declining nationally in all urban areas. But in LA, it's declined even more so. And so when you compare LA to New York, Chicago, Boston, et cetera, that LA's been doing pretty well.
Right.
So we have the lowest crime rate. Is 10,000 cops the right number? Do we need more? Do we need less? I would argue we need less.
Well, I will leave it to the police chief to determine what the size of the police force should be.
What do you think?
I think it's the outcome, you know. The outcome speaks for itself. It's not just the number of police officers you have, but it's also about how you deploy them. There's been a major transformation of how the police department has been managed. Started with Brandon and has been successfully continued on with this Charlie Beck. It is a model that's been applied around the country and it has worked successfully. I would argue that Los Angeles is probably the most successful. And so the issue with public safety and the size of the workforce is not just about a number, but it's also about the trade-offs associated with it, as you were pointing out. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to commit to 10,000 officers, okay, how do you do so, first of all, so that it's the cheapest possible? And what we did is that we reduced the starting salary of our police officers by 20%.
So what is a starting police officer?
It's about 40,000.
40,000.
The first pension reform we adopted was for police and fire because we were actually hiring them, and so we wanted every new hire to be under a new system. So we essentially are requiring them to work longer and pay more to get the same benefit that was given to...
You mean longer in terms of years, not in terms of hours.
That's correct. Yeah. And we're hiring them to replace those that are leaving. So we're hiring to attrition, and we target the hiring so that the hiring is actually done at the end of the year, reducing how much it costs that year. And it's tied to when people are actually leaving. So the city has become quite efficient in how it's hiring.
Just in case there's an interest out there, when are you going to be hiring cops next?
We're hiring them. This budget assumes that we're still hiring about 300 to 350 police officers.
So how do I apply to become a police officer?
Just go to the city's website and you'll navigate your way through that.
Okay. And if you can't figure that out,
then
they don't want you anyway,
office.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so... So hiring police officers, because this mayor has made that commitment, we worked with his office to make it as efficient as a proposal as possible. The trade-offs with that, of course, if that such huge percentage of your discretionary dollars goes to public safety, then what is it that you can't do anymore? And so that's really where you start seeing the discussion around the budgetary impacts of that decision.
So what does one police officer on average cost the city per year? When you add their salary, their training, their benefits, giving them a gun, a car, a badge?
Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000.
So $150,000 per officer.
Right, for the full freight of benefits and everything.
Okay. So in the campaign, one of the candidates has mentioned about hiring an additional 2,000 officers. How much more would that cost?
There's so many variables to that. So we started looking at that, and it really matters when you hire them, in what increment. So I'm not going to really throw out a number, but it obviously would be a sizable number. that's, from my understanding, that was a goal that she established. And again,
You just gave away who it was by saying
Yeah,
she. I was trying to be like neutral.
and I think from that standpoint, the question becomes, what are, you could set any kind of goal. You could say you want to pave every single street in Los Angeles in the next 10 years, or you could try to solve homelessness.
Isn't every single street paved?
Well, it's paved, but some of them are questionable,
Yeah,
right?
Here around Westchester, we want to talk to you about the sidewalks on Sepulveda Boulevard.
Yeah, I just drove by them. It's rather shameful, actually.
It looks like Afghanistan.
Yeah, maybe Afghanistan looks better sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, no, and that's why this budget actually, for the first time, actually invests money into sidewalks. But these are all about trade-offs, right? And it starts with what you said at the very beginning. A budget is really a document that reflects your values. It stresses what your priorities are. It stresses where you want your resources to go. And so this mayor actually established a threshold of a certain number of officers. He's committed to doing that and has put that in his budget. But because the economy is doing better, we actually, for the first time, have over $100 million of one-time revenue beyond, after we solve for our budget hole, that was invested. Now, there was an opportunity here, and a lot in sort of when you think about a budget, there are two times that we get worried as the CAO. Is when there's a crisis, when you're short money, and when you actually have new money.
Okay, why is that a problem? I never think of it as a problem when I have too much money.
Well, because if it's too much money that you get one time, and you decide that you're going to build something that's going to cost you more than one year, ongoing, then you have to confront that problem the following year. And so what this mayor wisely did is he invested the one-time money on one-time things, on fixing sidewalks, on dealing with police overtime bank that is worth currently about $110 million.
Well, what does that mean?
So when you're a police officer, instead of getting paid overtime, time and a half, you actually work those hours and you bank them, you put them aside. And so on the day that you retire, you actually get a check for the number of hours that you would have gotten had you actually gotten paid at the time. But it's not at the salary of the time that you work those hours, it's actually at the salary when you leave. So if you were making $75,000 when you worked it, and then you were getting paid $120 when you retire,
get that rate.
You get that rate. So it's
but you get it much later, though.
You get it much later.
It's cheaper for the city too, though.
Well, it's not necessarily cheap. It's not cheaper for the city. We don't have to pay it now. It's a deferred liability. That's what it is. And so it's a liability that grows by $20 million. And so what this mayor did is he actually said it's getting too high. We need to start paying it down. And he invested $15 million of one-time money to bring it down. So he invested in our street program. The funding for streets pavement is going down. He committed about $18 million to continue the number of streets that are being paved, so that our streets don't get any worse. They just get maintained at the current level.
Some would say, how could they get any worse?
Well,
but anyway,
believe it or
that's
not,
an editorial comment.
Yeah, believe it or not, they could. So you do worry when there's new revenue, because if you spend it on commitments that you have to deal with later, it's sort of if in your own personal finances, if you're constantly short, $500 after you pay your mortgage and your car insurance and your car payments and your electricity and all the things you have to pay, you're still short $500, and your house has a leaky roof, and your aunt decides to write you a check because she feels sorry for you for $1,000. Do you decide to buy a new car, so you have to pay those payments on an annual basis? Or do you decide, maybe this is the time to fix my leaky roof and actually create a savings account so I can deal with that problem later? And so this mayor wisely chose the latter, and actually for the first time has built a reserve fund or our savings account that actually exceeds what our basic policy is.
We are at Loyola Marymount University having a conversation with Miguel Santana, CAO of the city. He's talking about his leaky roof and his rich aunt. And so the city of LA wants to have a rich aunt.
Yeah.
But talking about a rich aunt or a rich uncle, how do the feds and the state help the city in terms of giving money? When do you get federal money? How does that process work? And how do you plan for that?
Well, with the state, frankly, we're just hoping that they leave us alone.
That they don't take money.
Yeah, so, every year for the last 10 years, the state finds ways to take money from us. I'm convinced that there's somebody in
So that's like a bully, not like a nice aunt. That's like a mean relative.
Yeah, exactly, a mean relative with a handout. And I'm convinced that there's somebody in the governor's office who gets a bonus for every dollar that they take from local governments, and they've been quite successful. The federal government is now going through its own fiscal crisis, right? And it's a concern about the deficit, the sequestration. So most local governments are simply saying, just leave us alone, allow us to live within our means, and then help us on capital programs and continue funding us for the things that you've already committed to.
Okay, and what typically is that? Transportation?
Transportation funding, they provide for job training, they provide funding for housing, they provide some grants for public safety. It's just across the board in different areas.
So education is incredibly important. Every single time we do a survey here at the Center for the Study of LA and we ask Los Angelinos about their priorities, education is number one all the time. The city of LA has no formal responsibility for education. That's an independent entity known as LAUSD, or the Los Angeles Unified School District, which actually has a much larger budget than the city does. Okay? If you were to look at the LA City's budget, what is in that budget today that has to do with education?
At the school district?
No, at the cities. Is there anything?
Hardly any.
Hardly any.
I mean, we do some job training, we provide some grants to do after-school programming, but that is not our core mission.
So, you know that this Mayor Villaraigosa, has talked quite a bit about education, and he has, in a sense, his success in this area has forced the two candidates that are running, and even the ones that were running in the primary, to continue to talk about education and how they were going to be the education mayor. Let's say on July 1st, the new mayor comes in and says, Miguel, I promised a lot about education, that I'm going to continue being the education mayor. Help me. What can I do? How can I have the city impact education? What would you tell him or her?
Well, I think it starts with what this mayor has done is the bully pulpit. There is a very real reason why the city should be concerned about education, and that is that our economy depends on it. There's a disconnect between the kind of jobs that are being created and the skill set of our population. And so in order for Los Angeles to be a competitive place where businesses want to start their businesses and grow, we need to have a workforce that could provide the kind of work that they need. And so our education system is central to that. So emphasizing the need to improve the quality of education is central should continue to be part of the agenda for the next mayor. Beyond that, I think there are a lot of opportunities where we can work in partnership. In a community, there are a number of government assets and programs that exist that often don't talk to each other. So you have a park and a school that are next to each other, and maybe you have a community center and a library. Okay, if you're a resident of that community, these are all government services that often work in isolation of one another, provide duplicative services, have different sets of requirements and expectations. As a government, our job should be to adapt ourselves to the need of the community versus having the community to adapt to us.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of potential to start figuring out community by community, how do we coordinate a centralized strategy? When I was at the county, I spent a lot of time trying to do that around children's issues and homeless issues, is adapting the way government provides services to meet the needs of residents and children and homeless individuals, not to meet our needs as government. It's a very hard thing to do. It's particularly difficult around agencies that report to different governing boards,
Right.
have different priorities, different funding streams. But that, I think, it's the most effective way we could partner with our colleagues in LAUSD, is look at or try to create a more seamless approach to how we provide services.
So in New York and in Chicago, the schools report to the mayor and to your equivalent person that's there. Here they don't. Which system do you think is better?
You know, I haven't studied that as closely as I probably should. My guess is that to do the kind of coordination I talked about would be a little easier if they're all part of the same
But can you
management
imagine
system.
your budget will immediately double
Right.
if you were in charge of the
If
schools?
not even larger. And some people should argue that in fact, not only should the city be responsible for education, but should also be responsible for social services and healthcare, right?
Which is what the county does.
Which is what the county does. So the closest model to that would be what exists in San Francisco or New York, right? Where it's a county city system. And
So wait a minute, you're not in charge of education.
Right.
You're not in charge of social services. You're not really in charge of the rail system and the MTA system. What are you in charge of?
Well, I'm personally not really in charge of much. I mean, I'm in the persuasion business. So my job is to provide recommendations to the mayor and the council. The mayor is the chief executive of the city. But as a city, we're in charge of picking up trash. We're in charge of maintaining your roads, of keeping your community safe, of providing programs, senior programs, of providing housing, affordable housing, of issuing permits, of ensuring that there's planning that's done to create communities, of our recreation and park system, of our library system. The quality of life issues, that's really what the city is responsible, the municipal services.
Antonio Villaraigosa, you already see, I mean, he's not even left office yet, and already people are beginning to miss him, right? The LA Times just wrote a real nice article about his approval rating because of the poll done by another university, which was almost as good as our poll. And it talks about how his approval rating is increased. If you were to give him a grade on public safety and crime, and I would give him an A. Whether you think he was whether he did all the work or not, that paper, that result about low crime rates and getting the police and the trust between the police and the community that's increased. I give him an A. What would you give him?
I actually would give him an A+, and the reason why is that
he's an easy grader.
Yeah, well, the reason is that you can't ignore the context. Okay, you know, the general impression or understanding of the way crime works is that crime goes up when the economy goes down. Okay. We just experienced the worst recession since the Great Depression. So not only had unemployment skyrocketed, but we also had less resources.
Right.
So in the context of what most people would assume would create more crime just by the nature of the environment, and with less resources to attack that, crime continues to go down.
Now, so what explains that?
Well, again, I think how we use our resources has a large part to do with it. You talked about the fact that this police department has a different kind of relationship with the community as it had in under prior administrations. People don't realize that over 50%, or actually the majority of the LAPD workforce was actually hired under this mayor. So that means they're younger.
So there's 10,000 cops, over 5,000 have been hired in the last 8 years.
Right, and more than that, actually.
Oh, so they're Villaraigosa cops.
Right, and they're younger. It's the most diverse workforce that you're going to see. It was funny when you saw, the LAPD address the Occupy LA encampment in front of City Hall after months of it persisting. The police officers were more diverse than the occupiers. And I would say that 10 years ago, that would have not been the case. And so we all talked about what diversity would mean, sort of on a hypothetical, sort of academic, almost philosophical standpoint back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, but when I was growing up, I was trying to avoid the Latino cops because they were meaner.
Yeah, they were meaner, right.
I mean, it's like, so That's a pretty amazing stat, though. But another stat that I've heard that really, to some extent, explains the decline of crime is that in LA and in many other urban areas, there are 100,000 less young people today than there were 10 years ago. And it's typical the people who commit crimes, the people who do graffiti or petty crimes tend to be young people. And we just have like 100,000 less of them than we did 10 years ago. So there's going to be less crime because of the demographic shift. We're getting older, and older people commit less crimes. And so that could be part of the explanation.
And that obviously plays a role as well. But the truth is that demographic shift is also occurring in Oakland and in Long Beach,
right,
and in Chicago. And instead, you're seeing increases in crime in those areas.
Okay, you give him an A+ in terms of public safety, crime, et cetera.
Now you got to remember he's my boss, so.
Yeah, but only for a couple more months. I mean, it's like, you know, who cares? He won't be, you know, will you even remember him on July 2nd? So education. Okay, we talked about the context of education where it's difficult, it doesn't have complete control. But given all that, I give him an A in terms of education. What do you give him?
I think that sounds right. I think he feels the most passionate that I've seen this mayor speak on any issue has been on education. He gave an incredible speech at the United Way conference just a few weeks ago, where you could tell his own personal commitment to this issue. We are all products of our upbringing and the communities that laid our foundation. Being a product of the East Side of Roosevelt High School, knowing how important education is for kids who are underrepresented in many areas, I think is reflected in how he manages that issue and why he's made it such a huge priority. So I would agree with you on that.
Transportation.
Transportation, again, is one of the issues he's led this issue to not only imagine a more expansive public transportation system, but actually create systems in place and funding sources in place to deliver them. Not just by asking us as Angelenos to pay more for a system of the future, but also by being an advocate at the federal government for greater funding and quicker funding so that the projects can be done within a realistic time frame.
The environmental policies.
You know, he's moved very aggressively to modernize the DWP so that they are reliant on more fuel-efficient modes of energy, and that he has made significant progress in. The trade-offs with that is that ultimately, as residents, it may cost us more. Mm-hmm. And so, but in terms of putting that at the front and center of what the DWP's mission is, to get out of coal, to use alternative sources such as solar and wind and other sources, this mayor has made a tremendous amount of progress.
So we're talking about the DWP. Okay, you're the CEO.
That's right.
I mean, you earlier mentioned that the mayor is the chief executive officer.
Right.
But in a sense, you're like the COO in terms of a corporation, the chief operating officer that does the daily stuff. The DWP, the airport, and the harbor are part of the city, but yet they're very autonomous and separate in terms of their budgets and revenues, et cetera. So what role do you play in governing those three, what we call proprietary departments? And why do we call them proprietary departments? Where does that word come from?
Well, because they act as proprietaries. They're independent. They're enterprises. They essentially have a very specific purpose. Their revenues that are generated stay within their specific departments. There's actually federal and state laws that prohibits the city from raiding the airport, for example, to deal with our general fund. And the DWP, the charter allows for a $250 million approximate transfer of funds, but that's only because the charter allows it, and it has existed for almost 100 years. So they're proprietary in that they're independent. Now, they're still part of a larger family. And so your question was in relation to my role with those specific departments. So whenever the council has to take action on a matter that involves those departments or their respective missions, such as approving rate increases at the DWP, such as dealing with the issue of Ontario Airport in this Inland Empire, such as an expansion program at the port, the council and the mayor asked for my counsel and advice on how to manage those issues and what positions they should take. And so everything from concessions agreements that may take place at LAX. And so my job is to look at what those departments are recommending from an independent point of view, ask a lot of questions, advise the mayor and the council whether they should support them or not, and then or to adjust them, to ask that the various respective departments make adjustments to them.
Why should the airport be independent of the city? I mean, I'm of the opinion that the city built the airport. We're the ones that really developed it. And then the federal government says, well, you built it, except you can't use any of the surplus for the city, even though we face all the traffic, we face the pollution, we get tremendously impacted by the airport. Why shouldn't some of their dollars mitigate what happens, not just around the airport, but even further? It's to me, it just feels that the airline industries have captured the appropriate committees, the FAA in Congress, and passed laws that prevent airports, not only LAX, but all airports in America, from charging the airlines even more money.
Well, I think the intent behind that is to encourage the airport to continue to invest in itself. You know, it's in the national interest to have a thriving network of airports around the country, and if the revenues they generate get reinvested back into maintaining that infrastructure, then they become less reliant on the federal government. So it's a way of ensuring a constant flow of revenue to build the kind of system that I think ultimately is in the national interest.
I mean, I get that, but on the other hand, if you build a great airport, run it efficiently, make money, the city ought to be able to keep some of it. And the same with the harbor as well. I mean, you know, what is it, 40% of everything that comes into America comes through the LA Customs District, which includes the LA Long Beach and LAX. And so it's a tremendous asset that we have for America. But that also means that there's a ton of trains and trucks and planes and traffic and pollution that comes here, and we need to mitigate that.
Well, I think it's about, you know, defining the function broader beyond the immediate boundaries of those facilities or those assets. And so how do you ensure that that those assets are connected to the broader community? I think what that's you're arguing for, and that may not be a bad idea. It will take literally an act of Congress to make that change, but I'm sure you're right on it.
Yeah, oh no, it's like, but the city has a lobbyist, right, in DC.
Right.
So, hey, so we talked about giving the mayor, we've given the mayor 4 A's: public safety, transportation, education, and the environment. Okay, where is he getting a C? Or is he just like
that's for the history, the individuals write history to determine.
So you're not going to give him a C in any area, huh?
Not today.
So, if you could wave your magic wand, does the mayor have, not this mayor, but just the mayor's position, have too much power or too little power? Or just right?
Well, you know, power is
I'm talking about formal power
authority.
within authority.
Okay.
I mean, let's put it this way. Yeah, you're right. Let's say authority. Does the mayor have just the right amount of authority, or does he need a little bit more, or maybe he has too much?
Well, it's hard to answer that question in isolation. And one of the things that I had to adapt to after working at the county for 16 years is that the authority in the city is diluted. So the mayor has some authority, the departments have some authority, the council has authority, the city attorney has authority, I have very little authority, but everything that gets done, or most things, cross my desk, so my authority comes in what do I advise. And so it is so diluted that it takes a very long time to get from here to there. And even if you come up with an idea, in order to, any one of those different factions or elements of government could derail it for reasons unknown. Mm-hmm. So it is a challenge to govern under that kind of environment. It's hard to engage in long-term planning. It's hard to deal with the crisis that comes into place. It's very confusing for folks externally, whether it's a developer wanting to build something, what's the right port of entry, whether it's a constituent who wants their roads paved, who do I call? Or a union in terms of figuring out who do I talk to try to make a case. And so I think
it's kind of complicated. Maybe you should hire a lobbyist.
Yeah, well, there's plenty who make a lot of living off of how confusing our governance structure is. We're a full employment act for that. But the challenge is it's not so much about looking at the mayor's authority in isolation. It's really about how it's diluted across the board. So what I often argue is that there has to be clarity as to ultimately where the beginning and end is of a process. And in many ways, it is the mayor. But how can that authority be strengthened through given all of the challenges that lay ahead? One of the things that few people realize is really how much power the city attorney has. Mm-hmm. Okay, he's the only office that can control your thoughts. And why I say that is that I may have an idea today about doing X, Y, and Z. Only the city attorney could say whether it's lawful and consistent with the charter and within the authority of my office. And so if he disagrees with any one of those things, he can say, you cannot think that and not move it forward. And so that is a tremendous amount of authority that office has. And there's pluses and minuses to having a city attorney who represents, one of the first questions I asked when I came to the city is, who's the client? When the city gets sued, who are they suing and who decides how do we proceed? And guess what? Till today, I get different answers to that question. Is it the city council that ultimately appropriates whatever settlement? Yeah. Is it the mayor who has fiduciary responsibility? Is it the department who made whatever mistake in the first place that resulted in that lawsuit? It's so dilute. Or is it the city attorney who believes his client is the people of Los Angeles, so he's empowered to make decisions on how to handle litigation?
So, as we all know, we're going to have a new mayor on July 1st. The LA Times had a bunch of experts not this weekend, but the previous weekend, kind of like, what should the new mayor do? And they talked about education, they talked about a variety of different things, and we discussed this in my class last week. So there's plenty of advice that the new mayor is going to get about what he or she ought to do here or there. But when you first meet with them, okay, and they say, hey, Miguel, I got plenty of advice about policy. But really, in terms of being a good mayor, running the city, what is your advice? What should I do in terms of how I administratively run my office, how I interact with the council and you? Don't talk to me about policy. Talk to me about administration. What advice would you give the new mayor?
Because the mayor is the chief executive, okay, it's a management job. It really is about managing a city, and so putting a team together that is obviously focused on managing the day-to-day, which may not be as sexy as managing politics, mm-hmm. but certainly managing day-to-day operations is central, and deciding how is that going to work. And what is the relationship between whatever team the mayor decides to put together and general managers and my offices. The second question to think about that I asked the mayor, well, where is it that you want to see the city in the next 4 years? What are your goals and objectives? And how do you define that? It's not just about announcing something at a press conference, it's about ensuring that it actually gets done. when I worked for Supervisor Molina, one of the things we often used to say is that it doesn't mean anything unless my mom knows about it. Most of us grew up in the district and our family still live there. And what that meant is that the greatest policy in the world, Gloria could have a great press conference on X, Y, and Z, but unless it means something to a resident in the community, then it really doesn't matter. And so I would ask the next mayor, what is it that you want Los Angelinos to feel differently about the city? Is it about the condition of our sidewalks? Is it about the condition of our streets? Is it about the unemployment rate? Is it about building partnerships with education? What are those objectives? And then it's part of my responsibilities to help the mayor figure out, how do we get there? What are the elements to that? And how do we ensure that they're funded, that they're managed, and they're ultimately accountable?
Yeah. We're at Loyola Marymount University talking to Miguel Santana, the Chief Administrative Officer, and we are going to have some of the students ask you questions if they so dare ask you questions. But so when the mayor comes in, how many positions does he control where he literally can hire and fire? How many employees are there altogether in the city of LA?
There's different ways of defining it, but somewhere between 30 to 40,000.
Okay, 30 to 40,000.
Right.
Of those, how many can the mayor say, when the mayor first comes in on July 1st, that he can hire directly?
Mayor offices vary between 150 and 200 employees.
So, and most of those are directly hired by the mayor, or some of them just stay on because they're like,
some of them stay on if the mayor chooses to keep them on. Most of them are hired within the administration.
Okay, so he's got a lot of hiring to do
Yeah,
then, and
yeah.
not much time
He or
really.
she.
He or she, excuse me. So on May 21st, they will know who won.
Right.
Actually, because of our exit poll at Loyola Marymount University, we'll know right at 8 o'clock. The city clerk won't know for probably another day or two, but we'll know. And so they only have like a month and a half to get their whole administration ready. Is there something for a transition team? Do you have something in the budget to help the mayor-elect set up and start interviewing, or how does that work?
I've never gone through this process, so, I have to rely on my staff who have. But I am familiar with the transition team that mayors usually put together that involves a group of supporters and experts from around the city. They help identify both staffing, individuals who could be in critical positions, and then as well as starting to put what a lot of folks think of the first 100 days of an agenda. What is it that this mayor wants to achieve? We will obviously work closely with whoever that mayor is, making sure that they have the resources and the kind of support that they need to be successful as soon as they start.
I mean, fortunately, in some respects, they're both current elected officials and both have offices already in City Hall.
That's
right. So it's not like you have to set something else up, but certainly they're going to need help in terms of getting ready and really, in addition to that, you're going to have 6 or 7 new city council members.
That's right.
So you have a new controller and possibly a new city attorney. So there's going to be a tremendous transition on July 1st. More than half of the elected officials in the city of LA will be brand new.
That's right.
And how are you going to deal with that?
Deal with them and meeting with them on a regular basis, providing them information, giving them an orientation on exactly where the city's at this time, and being a resource for them. It's tough when you start any new job, but particularly one where it's in motion, but when the new mayor starts will be the first day that the new budget actually is implemented. There'll be certain assumptions in that budget that this mayor may or may not agree with. He or she has to live with that budget until there are actual changes to it. Usually we open up the budget on a quarterly basis. Sometime in September will be the first time. And so we'll make recommendations, basically look at how is the budget looking in relation to revenues and expenditures, and make recommendations to the mayor and the council. The mayor may disagree or agree, and so they'll be the first shot at actually making real changes to the budget.
So one last question before I turn it over to the students. Ciclavia, phenomenal idea. I mean, 10 years ago, the idea that you would drive a bike anywhere in the city was like foreign. And I know when the city started talking about having bicycle lanes or whatever, I was actually on the Transportation Commission. I was totally against it. I thought it was a waste of time. It was going to be symbolic. Like 180-degree difference on that. It's just been an incredible cultural change that in this city of the automobile, so many people have taken to bikes. And I'm not just talking about Ciclavia, which was awesome, and I've participated in every single one of them, but you just see people riding bikes more than ever, not in terms of recreation, but literally to getting around. And it seems every single bus now has the racks where you can put them down. They encourage you to take them on the metro lines, et cetera. Are you as shocked as I am about the change in culture in terms of bicycles in LA?
You know, I am shocked that especially how quickly it has happened, but when you think about it, of any major city around the country, it makes the most sense here.
Why is that? The distances are so long, though.
The distances are long, but you probably could go faster on a bike given some of our traffic at some times.
It is frustrating when I'm sitting there waiting on
the bike's going faster than you.
Yeah.
But the fact that we have perfect weather helps, right? I mean, not perfect all the time, but for the most part. And this is, it is, what is amazing to see is really what an incredible city this is. That ultimately, this is a cool town. It is a place where where it's constantly transforming itself, constantly in real time. And so an idea that was presented not that long ago takes hold and becomes a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting to think about what is the next idea like that. And so Los Angeles 4 years from now, one thing is guaranteed, will be a different place. Right. And in our evolution, Los Angeles continues to get stronger and become much more livable. It's a city of communities that are tied together. The diversity is unmatched anywhere. So it is an incredible place to live. And this experiment is a perfect example. So it's not shocking that it's been so effective here. It is surprising that it's happened the way it has.
Yeah. Let's take a question.
Question for you is, what's your opinion on raising minimum wage, and if you think personally that can help grow our local economy? Thank you.
Well,
and what control does the city have over that?
Well, minimum wage is set by federal and state law. And so it's clear on that point.
Do you have any city employees that get minimum wage?
No.
They all get above that?
Yeah, they all get above minimum wage. Beyond that, what the city has said is that if you're going to work for the city, then you're guaranteed a particular wage that's higher than minimum wage. But if you're going to be a contractor with the city, you must pay your employees a livable wage, as we call it. And that's a few dollars higher than the minimum wage. And we also ask that you provide health care benefits. The logic behind that is that these are taxpayer dollars, and we should be encouraging our partners to essentially pay people an appropriate wage, because we know the impacts of that not occurring, which end up driving our cost in a different way. So to the extent that the city can mandate that anyone who contracts with the city provide a wage higher than the minimum wage we have.
But Valerie really points out a very important point, that the city, no matter how well it's run, no matter what's going on, is subject to external forces like the economy and the Great Recession that we had, or regulations from the state and federal government that we have no control over, that the city is a creation of the state of California, and therefore it could be impacted by any law that Sacramento decides to pass tomorrow.
No, we're still a charter city, so not any law.
Not any law, but
so we're still protected.
Well, explain the difference between a charter city and the general law city.
So a charter city, basically, it means it's governed by its own constitution, and so that constitution regulates our day-to-day operations and our rules and regulations. A general law city means that they rely on the state, and the state can, in fact, introduce a series of laws that impact how that city is managed. And so there in California, there's a mix. Usually large cities are charter cities, and smaller cities are general law city and reliant on the state. Now, part of the controversy around Bell, of course, is that they went from being a general law city into becoming a charter city, which allowed them a level of independence, which unfortunately was abused.
Right. Next question.
My question for you is, do you support increasing the funding for the local nonprofit arts organizations here in Los Angeles, particularly because a lot of the organizations took a hit in the large budget cut many years back? And my organization, in order for us to sustain ourselves, we've had to apply and reapply for grants that are unguaranteed in order for us to sustain ourselves in 3 to 5 years.
Which organization is it?
It's called the Association for the Advancement of Filipino American Arts and Culture. It's shortened as Philam Arts.
Okay. So believe it or not, even in the context of the fiscal challenges that the city has had, the funding for the arts has actually increased.
Okay, so in the budget that was released yesterday, how much money is in there for the arts?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but the reason I know it's increased because it gets a percentage of the hotel tax. So when people come to Los Angeles and stay in our hotels, they get a percentage of that off the top, about 1%.
So tourism has increased.
So as tourism increases and that hotel tax has increased significantly over the last few years, then the amount of funding going to the arts has correspondingly increased as well. So even as the city faced a fiscal crisis, then the actual funding for grants to organizations like the one that you're part of has actually been increased.
Well, they don't automatically get it. They
No,
have to
you have to
apply
apply.
for it.
You
So
have to
the
apply,
pie
but
that
the
people
pie
can
has
apply,
gotten
right?
bigger.
Right. Okay. Next question.
My name's Andrew. Thanks for coming. Do you think special interest groups are too influential in Los Angeles politics?
Yes. Next question. No.
Well, special interest could be any group, right? And you know, some people say that in the 70s and 80s, the business community was too powerful in Los Angeles. Some people argue now that labor is too powerful in Los Angeles.
But are they really a special interest? I mean, they're so broad. They represent workers. I know they have a very specific, I mean, what's your definition of a special interest? Someone that has a very specific policy within the city in terms of a contract, and that would make labor a special interest.
I would say that, as you know, any interest that has a primary objective and that represents a very specific point of view with specific outcomes associated with that. You know, as a city, it's our responsibility to balance all of those interests, to create our best work is done when we hear from a variety of factions or interests and then develop a policy that seeks to advance an issue, but is mindful of all those various points of view. And so whether it's balancing in a budget or deciding how much to fund for public safety or for the arts or a major policy around how we deal with our trash. All of those things are better, the outcomes are always much better based on the input that comes into it. So any system that is dominated by one interest alone doesn't result in the best outcome, because ultimately the benefits from that discussion and that dialogue from multiple point of view gets lost. And so as a city, it's our responsibility to always capture everyone's interest, not just one.
Does labor have too much power in the city of LA?
Well, too much power is a strong statement, but there's certainly a very influential role in the city, and they have a very clear point of view, and they represent the interest of working people from around in every level of government. You know, in the city of Los Angeles, over 95% of all city workers are represented, from our city attorneys to our clerks. The majority of my office is represented. So everyone, the majority of the city, and that's a little unusual. At the county, there were still about 10% of non-represented employees. It's always good to have a good balance.
Next question.
In Dr. Guerra's class this semester, we learned that the union interests that support Garcetti and Gruel differ in one main way, which is that his don't necessarily have an interest in municipal dealings, whereas hers have vital interests in municipal politics. And this has earned her the accusation that she is thus not independent, and that she will, if she becomes mayor, legislate or create policies based on having ties from these interests who have overwhelmingly supported her with independent expenditures. Given that, and that this budget doesn't allow for a raise for city union workers for several years, do you really see Wendy as being able to keep your budget as it is and to actually uphold it for the next several years?
So let's be clear. The budget that you're proposing requires that you go back and negotiate with the unions that the raises that they are guaranteed not be implemented.
Right.
I wouldn't do that.
Well, there's a broader goal.
Would you do that?
I have done it. I actually did do it. And
He's a nicer guy than I am.
yeah, well,
Sorry.
you know, I actually saw less in my paycheck when I took this job because I had to propose furloughs when I first got here, and so it's something that I did.
But that's right. You are going to the unions and you're saying, give back not money that they currently have, but money that they're supposed to get. You're going to say you're not going to get it, even though if they say nothing or do nothing, they're going to get it. There's nothing you can do about that, right?
Well, it's in our mutual interest to reach a consensus on this. The reason is that we've gone through 4 years of very difficult times, and I think everyone's exhausted. I know I am. And so what we laid out is a strategy that if we maintain discipline for the next 4 years, we will actually see a surplus at the light of that tunnel, okay?
Will they get raises then?
Perhaps they may, okay?
But no guarantees.
There's no guarantee. The county went 4 years without a raise. And in fact, our police officers went 4 years without a raise too. And so the question is, is this the new normal? Where we're struggling month after month, year after year, trying to figure out how do we simply survive? Or are we actually going to be at a point where we could start investing in our city again? And so
And when you say investing in our city, you're not necessarily raises, but investing in
our infrastructure,
the roads and the sewers.
The sidewalks on
all
Sepulveda,
that,
and dealing with our potholes, and expanding our recreational programs, and building more bike lanes,
Right.
and all the things that the quality of life issues that we all care about. And so that is really what I hope will be the discussion, is what is it that we're trying to achieve together? Now, you're right, they're entitled to those raises, and they may say, well, we're going to take them, and so it is my job to lay out what the consequences are of that. And so, you know, it'll be a discussion with the new mayor. There's an opportunity. Now, specific to your question about the role of support, of who your friends are as a candidate. Well, I worked for an elected official for 15 years, and she had a lot of friends. She had a lot of people who weren't her friends.
Supervisor Gloria Molina we're talking about.
And, you know, the one thing that she taught me, and it certainly is a motto of, that at the end of the day, you make a decision based on the merits, not based on who supports you and who doesn't. You don't base it on a tally score of your friends and enemies. And so every major decision that she's made, not just major or minor, I believe has, at least in my experience with her, has always been what is in the best interest of the community, what is in the best interest of the institution. And I believe that any elected official has the same capacity to do it, whether it's the controller or the councilman. Both of them can still be independent while still getting support from whether it's from one union or one business interest, or no matter who that is.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you, but you understand how tough it is for people to believe that that if somebody spends from $1,000 to $500,000 to get you elected, that you're going to listen to them. Doesn't mean you ultimately will do what they want, but certainly they're going to have access at minimum, and that you are inclined, all things being equal, to support what they want.
And the reason why it's important to believe that, because if you don't, then the only people who should run for office are those who are independently wealthy.
Right.
Because they technically don't own anything to anybody, right? If they're paying for the full campaign themselves, then they're just accountable to themselves. And being independently wealthy does not necessarily make you the best candidate or the best executive or the best council member or supervisor. It's about reconciling all of those interests and being honest with people.
What makes a great city?
A great city is made up if you could basically come from nowhere, from anywhere around the country, and basically create the kind of experience that you dream of. So, whether you're an immigrant from Mexico or someone who just came from Kansas City or someone who's born and bred here. A great city is a place where you could dream a future and actually have the resources, educational resources, the other kinds of supports to be able to achieve that dream. And it is that definition that has always made Los Angeles a great city. It's sort of the place where people come to dream and to deliver on those dreams. It's not surprising that the foundation of our economy are small businesses. We have a very diverse economic base. Yes, this is the home of Hollywood and the movie industry, but it's actually a small percentage of our economy. Our economy is tied to immigrants and the growth in small businesses they develop and allow to get stronger and bigger. And it's tied to a variety of different industries. When you go to downtown Los Angeles, you don't see a corporate headquarters.
Right.
And that's often something that we get criticized for, when in fact it's in many ways a benefit, because you're not going to experience the kind of situation where an entire industry either goes into crisis and collapses or decides to move to China or to a different part of the country. We're so diverse that our economy continues to adapt based on the changing environment globally and in the United States.
So when you take a look at universities, obviously USC and UCLA, USC is one of the largest private sector employees. UCLA is also a gigantic university. And we know kind of what you expect from those places. But what do you as a city official expect from the liberal arts colleges like Loyola Marymount University or Occidental College here in the city, but also like Whittier or Pomona that you're familiar with, even though those are not in the city of LA? But what would those cities expect from a Loyola Marymount University, a Pepperdine? I hate to say Pepperdine in this room, but a Pepperdine, et cetera. What is it that you will look for from a Loyola Marymount University?
I'm a huge fan of small liberal arts colleges. I went to one. I really believe that if I hadn't gone to one, I wouldn't be here today. It was at a small liberal arts college where I learned how to write, where I learned how to communicate through presentations. When you're in a class of 12, 15 students, you can't hide,
As much as you want to try.
Yeah, as much as you want to try. I went to a school where 2 of my professors were in my wedding, and who I had dinner with them just a few weeks ago. And most importantly, smaller schools teach you how to think. They teach you how to draw connections between disciplines, and they teach you how to take those connections and that analytical thinking and apply it into real action. And so the best thing that this university can do and the other liberal arts colleges is to continue to produce talent and Angelenos who want to take on some of our biggest issues and challenges that we're facing.
Big issues and challenges. If we were having this discussion 25, 30 years ago, the number one issue facing Los Angeles would have been air quality, smog. And in a sense, it is one of the great public policy victories of any urban area that we have conquered that. Yes, every once in a while we still have our bad days here and there, but today was beautiful. And the other day was Ciclavia or at the Books Festival. It was just incredible. Like you said, it's a beautiful place to live, and we cleaned up the air. It's been an incredible civic, political, governmental success. 35 years ago, that's what we would have been talking about. That would have been our number one issue. What do you see as in terms of a major challenge that's confronting us in the future? That you, when you think about it, you say, man, I wish I could start tackling that, but I'm just so focused on the budget and what's ahead of me the next year that I can't even begin tackling that, but I know I should.
Well, I still think education is our biggest challenge. It is really the foundation of everything else that we do. Mm-hmm. You know, it's hard to attract businesses. It's hard to attract the quality of life that we want if we don't have a workforce that's tied to the jobs of the future. And so our education system has made some progress, but we still have a long way to go. Mm-hmm. You know, it needs to be the model for the rest of the world. It should not only produce adults that know how to think, but come out with skills that are applicable to the realities of their life and the needs of the future. And so I think, you know, once we figure out how to do that, then everything else, I think, will fall into place.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What's Miguel Santana going to be doing in 10 years?
You know, I honestly don't know. I've been very fortunate in my career that I applied to one job 20 years ago at MALDEF, at the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And after that, every other job I've been asked to take, including the one that I have now. So I'm a firm believer that I'll end up where I need to end up. But beyond that, you know, I really actually enjoy an academic environment. I would love to one day be part of an academic community, a university in some form of capacity. I think it's an important thing to do to teach the next generation. I enjoy managing people. I enjoy managing difficult issues and helping organizations figure out where they want to be and putting a plan together for that, and changing that plan as you make progress or you confront new realities. But one thing I know for sure is that I'll always be connected to Southern California and to LA. I grew up here. I raised my family here. And I'm a proud Angelino, and this is my home.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank Miguel Santana, the CAO of the City of Los Angeles, and a proud Angelino. Thanks for coming.